Snow fell slowly from the dark sky, each flake dancing before it touched the ground. The air was so cold it bit at the skin. And the streets of the alien outpost were almost empty. A small figure walked through the snow, her steps light and slow. She was a lonely alien girl, thin from hunger, her skin pale from the cold. She wrapped her thin arms around herself, trying to keep warm. But the wind cut through her clothes like a knife. She carried a torn cloth bag close to her chest. Inside was only one thing, a small, broken trinket. It was the last thing her mother had given her. She held it as if holding it could bring her. Mother back. The girl's eyes kept moving left and right. She avoided the few people she passed. Most of them did not look at her. And the ones who did only looked with pity or dislike. She was alone in this world, and she knew it as she turned. Down a narrow street, a group of rough-looking alien traders stood near the wall. Their eyes followed her. One of them, tall and thin, smirked and called out something in a language she understood. It was a cruel joke about her size and weakness. The others laughed, their voices sharp in the cold air. The girl tried to walk faster, but the snow slowed her down. One of the traders stepped forward, his heavy boots crunching in the snow. His hand reached toward her bag. She pulled back, shaking her head, but he only laughed more. The girl's heart raced. She had been chased before, stolen from before. She knew she couldn't fight them. Her eyes darted around, looking for escape. Then a shadow moved behind her. A tall figure stepped between her and the trader. It was a human, broad-shouldered. Wearing a thick, dark coat, his breath came out in white clouds in the cold air. His voice was calm but carried a warning. He told the trader to leave the girl alone. The words were simple, but there was a strength in them that made the trader stop for a moment. The traders muttered to each other, but none of them moved forward. The human's hand rested on the weapon at his side. Not drawn yet, but ready, the girl stood frozen, looking up at him, her eyes wide. She didn't know if this stranger was here to help her or take her too. The human glanced down at her for a moment, then back at the traders. His tone sharpened. He told them to walk away before they regretted it. The leader of the traders hissed something under his breath, but he stepped back. The others followed, disappearing into the swirling snow. For a moment, the street was quiet. The only sound was the wind. The human turned to her, kneeling so his eyes were level with hers. He asked her where her parents were. His voice softer now. She didn't answer. She couldn't. Her throat felt tight, and she was afraid to speak. He reached into his coat and pulled out a thick scarf. Wrapping it gently around her shoulders, the warmth surprised her. She looked down at the scarf, then back at him. Her lips trembled, and she whispered a small thank you in her own language. She didn't think he would understand, but his faint smile told her he did. He told her there was a place she could go, somewhere safe. She would have food and warmth. But she would have to trust him. She didn't move at first. The word safe didn't mean much to her anymore. She had heard it before and still ended up alone, still ended up hungry and cold. But the scarf was warm. His eyes did not look cruel. And the cold wind pressed against her again, reminding her that if she stayed here, she might not see the next morning. Slowly she nodded, clutching her bag tighter. He stood and offered his hand. She hesitated, then placed her small, cold fingers in his gloved hand. They began walking through the snow-covered streets, the human's long strides slowing so she could keep up. The lights of the outpost flickered in the distance. Most people they passed paid no attention, but a few stared at the strange pair, a human soldier leading a small alien girl through the cold night. The girl's mind raced. She wondered why he had helped her, what he wanted in return, and where they were going. But for the first time in many days, she also felt something she had almost forgotten. A small flicker of hope. It was small, fragile, like the scarf around her shoulders, but it was there as they walked. She glanced up at him again. His face was half hidden by the scarf around his neck, but his eyes stayed alert. Always watching their surroundings, she noticed he kept himself between her and anyone they passed, as if guarding her without even thinking about it. She didn't know who he was or what he was to her now, but she knew one thing in that moment. With the snow falling around them and the cold chasing at their heels, she felt less alone. And that was enough to follow him into the unknown. The snow crunched under their feet as they moved away from the narrow street. The girl kept looking over her shoulder, afraid the traitors might come back. The human noticed and told her to keep walking, his voice steady, like nothing could shake. She didn't answer. She only tightened her grip on her torn bag. The scarf he had given her still wrapped around her small shoulders. The outpost streets were quiet. Most stalls were already closed for the night. Only a few dim lights flickered above shuttered doors. The air smelled faintly of smoke from nearby chimneys. The human slowed his steps so she could keep up, his tall figure blocking most of the wind from hitting her directly. She stayed a step behind him, unsure if she was following a protector or stepping into another kind of danger. They turned a corner and she froze. The traitors were there again. This time leaning against a wall like they had been waiting. Their eyes narrowed, and one of them grinned when he saw her. Her heart pounded. She wanted to run, but her legs wouldn't move. The human stopped too, his body shifting slightly so. He stood in front of her. He said nothing, but the air felt heavier. One of the traitors stepped forward and spoke, his tone mocking, saying the human had no right to take her, that she belonged to them. The human's voice was calm, but sharp as a blade when he replied. He told them she wasn't theirs, that she wasn't anyone's property. The traitor's grin faded, replaced with a scowl. The others moved in closer, circling like they wanted to trap them. The girl's small fingers gripped the back of the human's coat. She could feel the tension in his body. The traitors muttered to each other in a language she didn't know, but she understood their eyes. They were not going to walk away this time. The human reached into his coat and pulled out a thick, heavy-looking jacket. He crouched slightly and held it out to her, telling her to put it on. His voice was softer now, almost gentle. She hesitated, but he gave her a small nod, so she slipped it over her thin frame. The warmth hit her instantly, making her realize just how cold she had been. He told her they had to keep moving, but she needed to stay close. She nodded. Clutching the jacket tighter, he started walking again, leading her down a side street. But the sound of footsteps behind them made it clear the traitors were following. The girl's chest tightened with fear. She whispered something, asking if they were going to catch them. The human didn't look back. He only said, "Not if I can help it." There was a quiet confidence in his tone that made her believe him for a moment. They moved through twisting paths, the snow falling heavier now, the wind whistling between the buildings. He kept her close, his gloved hand on her shoulder guiding her. After a few turns, they reached a wider street where the lights were brighter. A food stall at the end was still open. The smell of hot broth drifted toward them, making her stomach twist painfully with hunger. She slowed, staring at the steam rising from the stall. But she didn't dare ask. She knew food cost credits. She didn't have. The human glanced back at her, then at the stall. His eyes softened for just a moment, but before he could say anything, one of the traitors shouted from behind them. They had caught up. The girl's eyes widened, and she stumbled forward. The human's hand shot out, steadying her. He told her to run toward the far alley, his tone leaving no room for argument. She hesitated for a heartbeat, not wanting to leave him, but his eyes told her to trust him, so she ran. Her small feet splashing through patches of slush. She heard the shouts behind her grow louder, followed by a dull thud and a sharp cry. She risked a glance back. The human was standing between her and the traitors, one of them already on the ground, the others circling like predators. Her heart raced, but her legs kept moving. She didn't know where she was going, only that he had told her to go. The alley ahead seemed darker, but before she could enter it, she heard heavy footsteps coming up behind her. Panic rose in her throat. She turned back just in time to see the human sprinting toward her. His coat moving with the wind, his eyes locked on her. He caught up quickly and placed a hand on her back, guiding her into the alley, his breath steady despite the run. They kept moving until the sounds of the traders faded. Only the wind and the crunch of snow underfoot remained. Finally, he slowed, glancing back to make sure they weren't being followed anymore. The girl's chest rose and fell fast, her breath forming white clouds in the cold air. She looked up at him, trying to understand why he had done this, why he had risked himself for her. She wanted to ask, but the words stuck in her throat. He looked down at her, his expression calm again, as if what had just happened was nothing unusual. Without a word, he reached into his coat again and pulled out a small canteen, handing it to her. She took it slowly, sipping the lukewarm water. The taste was simple, but it felt like life. After a moment, he finally spoke. Saying he could take her somewhere safe, she didn't answer right away, her mind still spinning. Safe, the word echoed in her head. She wanted to believe it. She wanted to believe him. Her eyes searched his face for any sign of a lie. But all she saw was the steady look of someone who meant what they said. Slowly, she gave a small nod, clutching the canteen in her hands. He started walking again, and she followed. Her steps still unsure, but a little lighter than before. The snow continued to fall, covering their footprints behind them, hiding the path they had taken. The traders were gone for now, but the girl knew they wouldn't give up so easily. Still, for the first time in a long while, she felt like she wasn't facing the cold world alone. The cold night seemed quieter now, but the human kept glancing behind them, his eyes sharp. The girl noticed his steps had changed, slower in some places, quicker in others, like he was making sure they weren't being followed. The snow kept falling, covering the streets in a soft white layer, but she could still feel the tension in the air. It was like a shadow that followed them both. They passed closed shops and dark windows. The only light came from the occasional lamp that flickered weakly. The girl walked close to him, her small hands holding the edge of his coat. Every now and then, she looked over her shoulder, but the streets behind them were empty. Even so, she could not shake the feeling that someone was there, somewhere in the dark. The human led her through a narrow alley. The walls on both sides, tall and close. The wind didn't reach them here, but the air felt heavier, quieter. She noticed he kept his hand near the weapon at his side, his eyes scanning every shadow. The sound of their footsteps on the snow was the only thing she could hear, until a faint crunch came from behind. She froze, her breath catching in her throat. The human stopped too, his head turning slightly. The sound came again, closer this time. The girl's heart began to race. She gripped his coat tighter. The human moved her behind him without a word, and they both waited. From the corner of the alley, a figure appeared, then another. The traders had returned, and this time there were more of them. Their faces were set with anger, and their eyes glinted in the dim light. The leader stepped forward, his voice low but filled with threat. He told the human to hand over the girl, claiming she was theirs. The human didn't move, didn't speak at first. He simply looked at them. The silence stretched. Then he said in a firm voice that the girl didn't belong to them, that she wasn't anyone's property. His words made the traders bristle. They stepped closer, spreading out to block the way forward and the way back. The girl felt trapped, her breathing quick and shallow. She could feel the heat of fear rising inside her. She thought of running, but there was nowhere to go. Her eyes darted to the side, searching for any small path she could take, but the walls were too high and the way too narrow. The human glanced down at her, his face calm, then back at the traders, his stance steady. One of the traitors laughed and made a gesture, and suddenly, two of them moved in quickly. The human stepped forward to block them, his body still shielding her. His voice dropped lower, warning them to stop, but they didn't listen. The girl's mind was racing. She had been in dangerous situations before. But this felt different. There was no one else around, no crowd to hide in, no market noise to cover her escape, just the cold, the snow, and the steady presence of the human in front of her. The traitors moved closer, their boots crunching loudly in the snow. The sound echoed in the narrow alley. The girl could feel her hands trembling as she held onto his coat. The leader smirked, clearly confident they could overpower one man, even a human. The human's eyes scanned them quickly, counting, watching their movements. Then, without turning his head, he spoke to her quietly, telling her not to let go of him no matter what happened. She swallowed hard and nodded, her voice too small to answer. Then one of the traitors lunged, and everything seemed to happen at once. The human's hand shot out, pushing the attacker back, the movement fast and controlled. The girl stumbled but kept her grip on him. The other traitors growled in anger. The leader stepped back, ordering the rest to attack. The human reached into his coat and pulled out something small. Not a weapon yet, but a tool he could use if needed. The girl could see the tension in his shoulders, but also the certainty. He wasn't afraid, he was ready. The traitor slowed for a second, unsure if they wanted to make the first move again. The human took a step forward, making them step back just slightly. His voice was steady as he warned them again to walk away. The girl didn't know why, but hearing him speak like that made her believe they had a chance. Even though they were outnumbered, the leader's eyes narrowed. He muttered something to the others, and they began to spread out further, clearly planning to trap them fully. The human glanced quickly at the far end of the alley, then back to the girl. His hand rested briefly on her shoulder. A silent signal. Without warning, he turned and moved, guiding her quickly toward the side of the alley. There was a narrow gap between two buildings, just wide enough for her to slip through. He told her to move fast, his voice quiet but firm. She squeezed through, her small frame fitting easily. On the other side, she could see an open street. She turned back, expecting him to follow immediately, but he stayed in the alley, facing the traitors. One of them lunged again, and this time the human reacted faster, stepping aside and sending the man crashing into the wall. Another traitor tried to grab him, but he twisted free, his movements sharp and practiced. The girl's heart was pounding. She wanted to run to safety, but she couldn't leave him. She stayed in the gap, watching as he fought, the snow falling faster now, the flakes spinning in the dim light. The traitors began to hesitate, clearly realizing this fight was not going the way they had planned. Finally, the human stepped back toward her, his breathing steady. He took her hand and pulled her through the gap. They emerged onto the open street, the cold air hitting them again. He didn't look back, but his pace quickened, leading her away from the alley. The girl followed closely, her small legs working hard to keep up, her mind still replaying what had happened. She didn't understand why he had done it, why he had stayed to face them instead of running. All she knew was that in that moment, she felt safer beside him than she had in a very long time. The street ahead was brighter, a few lights from open shops still glowing. The human slowed just enough for her to catch her breath. He didn't speak, and neither did she, but something had changed. The space between them felt smaller, and the fear that had been heavy in her chest was now mixed with something else, something she hadn't felt in years, the start of trust. The air in the alley was sharp and cold. Every breath turned into a white cloud that quickly faded into the dark. The traitors stood in a half circle, their boots crushing the snow as they stepped closer. The human stood tall in front of the girl, his body a shield between her and the danger. His eyes never left theirs, his hands relaxed but ready. The girl's fingers were tight around the edge of his coat, her heart beating so fast she could feel it in her ears. The leader of the traders smirked, tilting his head like he thought this was going to be easy. One of his men lunged forward suddenly, his arm reaching out to grab the human. But before the girl could even gasp, the human moved, its body twisting with speed and precision. His hand shot up. Grabbing the attacker's wrist and pulling, the man stumbled forward, and with one sharp movement, the human slammed him in two. The wall, the sound of impact echoing through the alley. The other traders froze for half a second, then two more came at him from opposite sides. The human's boots slid slightly on the snow. But his movements were quick and controlled. He ducked low, his arms sweeping out to knock one attacker's legs from under him. At the same time, he turned to block the punch of the other. The girl could only stare, her fear mixed with disbelief. She had never seen anyone move like that. The man who had been knocked down groaned. Rolling onto his side, the other stumbled back, holding his arm. The human didn't pause, his eyes scanning for the next move. Another trader pulled out a short metal pipe from his belt, swinging it in a wide arc. The human stepped back just in time, the pipe missing his face by inches. Then he moved forward again, his shoulder slamming into the attacker's chest, sending him back into the snow. The girl's breathing was uneven, her small hands trembling. She wanted to close her eyes, but couldn't. She kept watching, unable to look away from the scene. She could see that the human wasn't just fighting to win. He was fighting to protect her. Every move he made kept her behind him. Every step pushed the attackers farther from her. Two traders tried to rush him at once, but he shifted to the side, letting one pass by before driving his elbow into the other's ribs. The man cried out, dropping to his knees. The girl felt a strange mix of fear and something else, something like safety, because for the first time, the people who scared her were the ones falling back, not the other way around. Snowflakes spun in the air, sticking to the human's coat and hair. His breath was steady despite the fight. The leader of the traders finally stepped forward, his face twisted in anger. He swung at the human with a heavy fist, but the human caught his arm mid-swing, holding it firmly before twisting it behind his back. The leader grunted in pain, his knees bending. The human leaned in slightly, speaking in a low, cold voice the girl couldn't fully hear. Whatever he said made the leader's eyes flash with something between fear and fury. With a final shove, the human released him, sending him stumbling backward into the snow. The fight was over almost as quickly as it had started. The traders lay scattered in the alley, groaning or holding their injuries. The human didn't look at them again. Instead, he turned to the girl, his hand reaching out to take hers. His grip was warm, steady, and it made her legs start moving again before she even realized it. They ran, their boots crunching in the fresh snow. The cold wind hitting their faces as they turned down another street. The girl's breath came in short bursts, her chest tight from both fear and the speed of their escape. The human didn't slow until they had put several blocks between them. And the fight, finally ducking into a quiet side path, the girl leaned against the wall for a moment, trying to catch her breath, her eyes wide as she looked at him. She wanted to ask him why he had stepped in, why he had risked himself for her. But her voice was small and shaky, so the words stayed trapped in her throat. He glanced at her, checking to see if she was hurt. His eyes softened just slightly when she shook her head. Then he pulled a small cloth from his coat and handed it to her. She realized her hands were still trembling. The cloth felt warm, carrying the heat from his pocket. She held it without thinking. Finally, she found her voice. Though it was barely more than a whisper, she asked why he had helped her. His answer was short, his voice calm and certain because someone should. The words were simple, but they sank deep into her heart. No one had ever said something like that to her before. No one had looked at her and seen someone worth protecting. They stayed there for a moment longer. The sound of the wind filling the silence between them. Snowflakes landed gently on her hair and the scarf he had given her. She thought about the way he had stood in front of her. The way he had fought without hesitation. She didn't know who he was. But she knew she wanted to keep walking beside him. When they finally started moving again, his pace was slower, matching hers. The streets ahead were quiet, the dim lights making the snow glow faintly. Each step they took felt like it was carrying them farther from the life she had known one of fear. Hunger and loneliness toward something she didn't fully understand yet, but wanted to believe in. The fight had been dangerous, and the traitors might not give up, but for now, she felt safer than she had in years. The memory of his voice, steady and sure, echoed in her mind, because someone should. She kept repeating those words silently as they walked. Her small hands still held in his, not wanting to let go. The wind outside was still howling when they reached a small, worn building on the edge of the outpost. The human pushed the door open with one hand, keeping the other gently on the girl's shoulder as if to guide her in. The moment they stepped inside, a wave of warmth wrapped around her. It was not much, but after hours in the cold, it felt like stepping into another world. The room was dimly lit, the walls made of old wood. A small fire crackled in a corner stove, giving off just enough heat to chase away the chill. The girl stood just inside the doorway, her eyes darting around. She was not used to being indoors, anywhere safe. Most places she had been forced into were noisy, crowded, or dangerous. But here it felt quiet. The human took off his heavy coat and hung it on a hook by the door. Then he looked at her, holding out his hand for her scarf and jacket. She hesitated for a moment, then slowly removed them, handing them over. He shook off the snow and hung them next to his own things. Her clothes underneath were thin and worn. But now that she was out of the wind, she could feel her fingers slowly starting to warm. He walked over to a small table in the corner, opened a pack, and pulled out something wrapped in cloth. When he unfolded it, the smell of food filled the room. The girl's stomach twisted painfully. It had been so long since she had eaten a full meal. She stood frozen, her eyes fixed on the bread and dried meat he placed on the table. He noticed her hesitation and pulled out a chair. Telling her to sit, she moved slowly, like she was afraid this was some kind of trick. But when she sat, he placed the food in front of her and stepped back. She looked at him, unsure if she was allowed to touch it. "Go ahead," he said softly. And the words felt strange to her ears, like they didn't belong in her life, but she reached out anyway. Taking a small piece of bread first, she bit into it slowly. The taste was simple, but to her, it felt rich. She chewed carefully, her eyes never leaving him, as if she expected him to change his mind. He sat down across from her, eating his own share without rushing, letting her eat at her own pace. After a while, she spoke quietly, telling him her name. It felt odd to say it after so long without anyone asking. He repeated it back to her, his voice steady, as if promising to remember it. She told him a little about herself. Not much. Just that her parents had been taken during a raid, and she had been alone ever since. Her voice wavered when she said it, but she didn't cry. She had learned a long time ago that crying changed nothing. The human listened without interrupting, his eyes focused entirely on her. Not judging, not pitying, just listening. When she finished, there was a long silence. The only sound was the fire crackling. Then she asked the question that had been burning in her mind since the alley. "Will you leave me too?" Her voice was so small that for a moment, she thought maybe he hadn't heard her, but then he leaned forward slightly, his expression serious. "No," he said firmly. "I promise I'll protect you, no matter what." The words were strong, but there was no show in them, no empty comfort. They felt heavy, like he meant every single one. She stared at him, unsure if she could believe it. but something in his voice made her want to. For a moment, she didn't know what to say. Her chest felt tight, and she looked down at the table, focusing on the bread in her hands. No one had ever said something like that to her before. And she didn't know how to hold it inside her after they finished eating. He stood and walked over to a small shelf, pulling down a blanket. He handed it to her and pointed toward a small bed in the corner. The blanket was thick and soft. She hesitated, then moved toward the bed. It looked cleaner than anywhere she'd. Had slept in months, he stayed near the door for a while, checking outside through a small window, his posture alert even though they were indoors. She sat on the edge of the bed, wrapping the blanket around herself, watching him. She could see that he wasn't just helping her out of kindness, he was preparing for something. Something he expected to come. The fire's light flickered across the walls, and the warmth made her eyelids heavy, but she kept them open, afraid that if she fell asleep, she might wake up to find all of this gone. The human finally turned from the window and sat in a chair near the bed. He didn't say anything, but his presence felt like a wall between her and the outside world. She lay down slowly, still watching him, her mind filled with questions she couldn't ask. She wondered why he had decided to help her, why he hadn't walked away like so many others had. She wondered if he had lost someone too, someone he had promised to protect and couldn't. As her eyes began to close, she realized something. She didn't feel as cold anymore, not just because of the blanket or the fire, but because of him. His promise still echoed in her mind. I'll protect you, no matter what. She held on to those words like she had once held her mother's trinket. Outside, the snow kept falling, covering the streets and hiding the tracks that had brought them here. For tonight, the danger was far away, and for the first time in a long time, she felt a small, fragile kind of peace. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but she knew that as long as he was there, she would not have to face it alone. The days that followed felt strange to the girl. She was not used to waking up in the same place every morning, not used to the warmth of a blanket that belonged to her or the smell of food cooking when she opened her eyes. At first, she thought it might be a dream. But every time she saw the human sitting near the small fire, keeping watch while she slept, she knew it was real. He never asked for anything in return. He simply made sure she ate, rested, and stayed warm. During the day, they moved from one quiet place to another, avoiding the busy parts of the outpost. The human always kept her close, his eyes scanning the streets for trouble. She noticed how he seemed to know where to step, which alleys to avoid, and when to pause and listen before moving forward. But as the days passed, a shadow began to grow over them. Whispers reached them from passing strangers. Talk of a bounty placed on her by the raiders who had taken her parents. They wanted her back, and they were willing to pay anyone who could bring her to them. When she first heard this, her heart dropped, fear twisting in her chest. She thought he might send her away now that she was a danger to him too, but he didn't. When she told him about the bounty in a shaking voice, he only nodded and said, "Then we prepare." His words were simple, but the way he said them made her feel like she was worth fighting for, even if it meant facing danger. That night, he began to teach her small things: how to hold a blade, how to listen for footsteps in the snow, how to tell if someone was following them. At first, she thought he was just trying to pass the time, but soon she realized he was teaching her how to survive. She practiced with clumsy hands, her grip on the blade weak, her steps too loud in the snow. But he never scolded her. Instead, he showed her again and again until she began to improve. The first time she managed to land a strike on the practice target he had set up. He gave a small nod and told her, "Good, you're learning." She felt a quiet pride in that moment, something she hadn't felt in years. Still, the nights were the hardest. The fear came back when the world was dark and quiet. Sometimes she woke suddenly, her body trembling from dreams she couldn't escape. Dreams of the raid, of losing her parents, of cold streets and empty stomachs. But every time she opened her eyes, he was there, sitting by the fire with his weapon close, keeping watch like he had promised. Once, she asked him why he didn't sleep like normal people. He told her he rested when he could, but not when there was a risk. Then he added, "If you're safe, I'm fine." She didn't answer, but inside, those words felt heavier than the blanket she wrapped herself in. At night, one evening, as they were preparing a small meal in the shelter they had found for the night, she heard a faint noise outside, like the crunch of boots in the snow. She froze, looking toward the door. He noticed instantly and motioned for her to stay silent. He moved to the window and looked out just enough to see. When he came back, his face was serious. He told her they had to move, and they had to do it now. She didn't ask questions. She trusted him. They packed quickly. The fire was put out, and they slipped into the night. The air outside was colder than usual, the snow falling in heavier flakes. They walked through narrow alleys, their footsteps muffled by the snow, but she could feel the tension in him, his movements sharper, his eyes flicking to every corner. Finally, when they reached an open street, she saw white two figures stood far behind them. Barely visible through the snow, but moving in their direction, her chest tightened. She wanted to run, but he didn't. Instead, he guided her toward a side path that led to the old train tunnels beneath the outpost. It was darker there, the sound of dripping water echoing off the walls. She stayed close to him, her hand gripping his coat again, like the night they first met. They kept moving until the sound of footsteps above them faded. Only then did he slow, his breathing calm despite the long walk. He turned to her and asked if she was all right. She nodded, though her hands were still shaking. In that quiet, she realized something. He was not just protecting her because of a promise. He was preparing her for a future where she could protect herself too. And for the first time, she felt like she might be able to face the world one day without running. They found a small hidden place in the tunnels to rest until morning. The fire was small, barely enough to keep them warm. But she didn't mind. She sat close to him, listening to the slow rhythm of his breathing. The bounty on her head still existed. The raiders were still out there. And she knew they would not give up easily. But the fear that once ruled her heart was now met with something else, determination, because every day with him was making her stronger, and every night he kept his promise, proving to her again and again that she was not alone anymore. The night was still when it happened. The girl had been sleeping lightly, her small body curled beneath the blanket. But the sound of boots crunching in the snow outside woke her before dawn. She froze, listening. The sound was wrong. It wasn't just one or two people. It was many, moving together. She sat up, her eyes wide. The human was already awake, sitting in his chair by the fire, his weapon resting across his knees. He looked at her and gave a small shake of his head, telling her without words to stay quiet. Then he stood and moved to the window, pulling the curtain back just enough to look outside. His jaw tightened. "They've found us," he said quietly, his voice calm but firm. The girl felt her chest tighten. She didn't need to ask who they were. She knew the raiders had come. He moved quickly, but without panic. Grabbing his pack and handing her a small blade, she stared at it, her hands trembling. "I can't," she whispered, but he crouched down in front of her, his eyes steady on hers. "You can," he told her. "You're stronger than you think." Outside, the snow crunched louder now. Shadows moved against the dim light of the sky. She could hear voices low, sharp, and growing closer. The human's movements were precise. He checked the door, the windows, and then motioned for her to stay close. They could not run without being seen. The only choice left was to stand their ground. The first crash came from the side wall, up. Heavy thud as someone tried to break through. The girl's breath caught. The human moved toward the noise, his weapon ready. Then the front door shook under the weight of another hit. When the raiders finally burst inside, the fight started instantly. The human moved like he had in the alley before, fast and controlled. Every step placing him between the attackers and her. One came at him with a blade, but he blocked it, twisting the weapon away before driving the man back into the wall. Another tried to rush past him toward her, but she remembered his words. Her grip on the small blade tightened, and when the raider lunged, she stepped aside and slashed at his arm. The motion was awkward, but it was enough to make him stumble back with a cry. She was shaking, but she stood her ground. The fight filled the small space with noise boots scraping the floor, weapons clashing, the sharp sound of breaths taken in the cold air. The girl's world narrowed to two things: the human's steady presence and the raiders' angry faces. At one point, one of the raiders grabbed her wrist, pulling her forward. Her heart jumped into her throat. But before she could cry out, the human was there, pulling the man off her with such force that he crashed into the table. Splitting it in half, she could feel herself changing in those moments. The fear was still there, but it wasn't controlling her the same way every time she moved, every time she swung the blade or stepped back at the right moment. She felt like she was no longer just someone to be saved. She was fighting beside him. The snow outside had begun to glow faintly with the first light of morning when the last raider stumbled out of the door. Clutching his shoulder and cursing, the human didn't chase them. He stood at the doorway, breathing slowly, watching until the last shadow disappeared into the falling snow. The girl's arms felt heavy, her hands still gripping the blade. She didn't realize until now how fast her heart was beating. The human turned back to her, his eyes scanning her quickly for any sign of injury. When she shook her head, he gave a small nod. "You really kept your promise," she said quietly, her voice unsteady but full of something new, something stronger than gratitude. He looked at her for a moment, then gave a faint smile. "Always," he replied. For a long moment, they stood in the doorway, the snow falling gently now, covering the footprints of the fight. The world felt strangely calm after the storm. The girl felt tired, but she also felt different. Like something inside her had shifted. They began to pack their things. They couldn't stay here now. The raiders would come back, maybe with more men, but as they moved, she noticed something. He didn't treat her like someone fragile anymore. He handed her supplies to carry, spoke to her like an equal, and when they stepped outside, he didn't walk ahead to shield her from everything. He walked beside her. The road ahead was long, and the snow made every step harder. But she didn't complain. She thought about the fight, about how she had stood her ground when it mattered, and about how he had never once left her side. For the first time in her life, she didn't just feel protected. She felt like she had the strength to protect someone else too. And as they walked into the white horizon, she knew that no matter where they went, they would face it together, side by side, not just protector and girl anymore, but something closer: family.